Hi, good morning. My name's George Baslin and this is the Flow of Life community. And I'm here this morning with the beautiful Maria Ilife Woods. I got it right this time. Morning, Maria. Love. How are you?
Morning, Georgia. Nice to be
I
here.
call you Ria.
Yeah, absolutely can. Yes. Yeah.
How are you? We're in
Yeah.
the middle of the throes of winter here, so we're a bit chilly.
Yeah, it is a bit chilly. And I'm in the middle of having a kitchen refitted, which is why I've got no background. Because my office is a storage room, come kitchen, come office, come everything.
Well, the only consolation whilst you're writing, you don't have to reach far for a cup of tea.
You know, that's right.
So it has to be a plus side to everything, doesn't it? And you probably drink more tea or coffee or whatever it is because it's so close.
You think.
Thank you for coming on here again with me. We did do this earlier, but unfortunately my technical skills somehow managed to cock it up totally. But
obviously wasn't meant to be published, that
wasn't.
conversation.
Well, it was meant to be. And I've just done a lovely manuscript course with Rick, who's a beautiful...
pushed you to the limits a bit.
No, it was, I mean, I really enjoyed it from the point of view that you stretched me as a human being, just with the questions and your insightful questioning of what, why, look deeper. So it was awesome, not just to pull this together, but to see, I mean, and I'm sure a lot of writing teachers are brilliant, but with what you understand about life, what our understanding about life from 3P point of view makes you a different sort of teacher.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because I've actually been reflecting on that just in the last couple of days. Really, like, I had no idea you were going to mention that today. That is interesting. But and thinking about the program that I'm starting in, it starts in February, but the one that's based on my book, is that the work that I do with people, whether on the face of it, it looks like it's to do with writing and it looks like it's to do with publishing a book, but it is much deeper than that. And I know that I'm always pointing people back to their deeper wisdom. That's what I'm always doing, regardless of what it is the stated thing that we're working on. So in that program, we were working on a manuscript. That's the stated outcome. And Jules is very much the same. Like, she runs Jules Swales is our writing teacher. She teaches people how to write, but there's something deeper going on in those lessons, because of the understanding that we have about how life works and where we're pointing people to. So yeah, it's I've seen that quite a few times where people come on the programs with me, that program with me and Jules, and something else happens because of where we point people to, not just let's get a manuscript done.
Because it's interesting, because I know for the first time it was about writing for product, which, I mean, this creative energy that we are will write from there. But it was quite interesting because my daughter read my manuscript and there were a couple of pieces that I had sitting and written for product, and she just said, "Mummy, your voice sounds different."
Interesting.
She said, "I don't hear your voice in it as clearly as the ones that have just arisen as they've arisen."
But that's the beauty of then being able to revise and craft.
Yeah.
So I mean, I do write for product quite often. I've been doing it more recently because I want to put more stuff out in the world for my write community that is in service to them in particular. So it's very much, there's a range of articles that I want to write. So if I just waited for those to show up, they're probably they might show up, I don't know, but they haven't been showing up in the past. Mm-hmm. Whereas now I sit down, and for the first time in a long time, in the front of my journal, so I have my journal here, in the front of it I have a post-it note, and this is a list of ideas that I know people want to know about. You know, I've asked people in my community what they want to know about. And so I know at some point I'm going to sit and write something for each of those. Now, the difference is what I do, I sit down to write and think, right, I'm going to pick one of these. I don't think about it. I pick one off the list. I don't do it in order. Pick one off the list. But I then still do the same as what I would do for class, for method writing, is I hold that loosely and then write and see what comes. Yeah. So I don't pre-plan what I'm going to write, and it gets very interesting where it goes when you do that.
Yeah.
But exactly the same thing. What I find is definitely the first couple of paragraphs are often they don't end up in the piece. Because what comes afterwards is much more profound. So even in the articles that I write, so I've written one about writer's block, I've been one about establishing a writer's practice. The one that's coming out at the end of this month is to do with that question that we all have: who am I to write this book? You know, and so I knew that was what I was going to write about. But then what interesting things follow when you don't hold on to, oh, it's going to cover this, and this. But then, you know, if it isn't your voice, then you go back and craft it and revise it.
Yeah. Well, it was really interesting to hear somebody else say that, and it shows what people pick up on. When you're writing a piece, you're not thinking about what anybody else is going to pick up on, because it's just what's flowing through you. And it was such a fascinating thing to hear, because as you're writing these pieces, I mean, I've read them a million times, so you become complacent with them, which also just shows the value of someone else's clear mind.
Yeah.
And actually the fact that when something is really from within you, it has a different feel.
Yeah. And it touches people in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing to notice, because then the next time you sit down to write with something on your mind, you know, you have an idea of what you want to write about, then perhaps you'll dig a bit deeper to find your voice in the writing, having had that experience of somebody else noticing that it sounds different. And it really is fascinating. I'm working with somebody whose book's going to be published soon. And he sent me a piece. He says, oh, I want to add this. I need this bit to be added in. And I read it and I thought, there's just something, I don't know, there's something not quite right about this. It didn't have the right feeling. And I emailed back and I said, I mean, we can make sure it's included in the book. I said, but it doesn't seem to fit with the feel of it, doesn't fit with the rest of it. And he said, oh yeah, somebody gave me that quote and said I could use it if I wanted to in my book, and I thought I would. And you know, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, because it really, what I realized is that I had become so attuned to his voice that and somebody else's voice didn't fit. So people do notice it and do feel it.
Well, I mean, it's, you know, the pieces, and I mean, you've written how many books now?
I've published 5. And two of them are compilations. Well, you know, the truth is, I was thinking about this the other day, like I would say as a rough proportion of everything that I write, probably only 3% of what I've actually written gets published. because it's very, you know, I've been writing pretty much every day since 2009. So how many years is that? You can you can do the maths.
19, 10, 14 years nearly.
Yeah. And I've published 5 books. Now, if you think how much I've written in pretty much writing every day for 14 years.
I mean, that's a tiny proportion.
Tiny proportion. Yeah, tiny proportion. But none of that is wasted. It's just for me, because I write because I enjoy writing. I don't write because I need to publish anything. And then every now and again something shows up and I think, oh yeah, this could be a book. I mean, the Daily Yarns and A Caged Mind, they were half written, a bit like you found with the manuscript class. You've been writing on a regular basis for so long, and the book was in there.
Well, I mean, what I found so fascinating is actually all the pieces, I think maybe bar one, or 2, didn't come from any of my classwork.
Interesting.
They were all pieces that appeared around I was doing my class writing.
Yeah.
And it was really fascinating to see that these pieces had just arrived when I didn't even notice them. They were just part of life unfolding, and they had no destination as far as I was aware to be at.
Yeah.
But it was only when I started a manuscript class and started going through and seeing actually none of these were from class.
Interesting.
They all appeared externally, but
Yeah.
these external ones, all as I see it, an editor may say definitely not, whatever, but to me they all came into one cohesive thing that I just hadn't seen before.
Yeah. I think that's fascinating. It's like when you hear a lot of authors talking, and you know, I've heard quite a lot of, you know, famous authors talking about where their story comes from. Like most of them will say it comes from someplace. It doesn't feel like it comes from me. You know, most of them say that when they really sit down and get into it. Some of them say it's like taking dictation, and some of them say, you know, it comes from a place. I had a lovely Stephen King quote. You know, he says that it just comes from somewhere, and our job as authors is just to capture it on the page.
Oh, totally. I mean, I don't know about you, but you can feel something cooking. Same way I do with my paintings. I can feel something get to a point where, and we spoke about this, I think, last time, it has a total life of its own. And the button keeps getting pushed until you get, okay, something's just waiting to be birthed. And then once there's the release of getting it on the page, it's like, why didn't I see that 12 hours ago? Because I saved myself that, not the discomfort, but it's amazing how you get attuned to it. But even then you can forget that. Oh yeah, I'm just getting that push. I'm getting that push. Now just go and do it.
I think it's just really interesting that, like, if you talk to 10 different people who write, there'll be 10 different experiences of writing. You know, lots of people that I work with, they find getting something down on paper really hard. Like I don't find it hard. You know, I write for the sake of writing. I write because I enjoy it, and I don't necessarily feel like I don't necessarily realize that something is coming in that way that you just described. You know, I just think it's fascinating. You know, sometimes by the time I finish writing, I'll often have seen something about myself or about life or whatever that that was new and fresh. That I love that. You know, just in the writing. And you know, I had so many insights for me that have come through the writing. And I think it's some of it doesn't, I don't know that it's what keeps me writing. Maybe it is. But having that experience, but I never have any thoughts about, oh, this looks like it's going to be something that I publish until later, probably. Yeah.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love that I don't know what word's going to come next.
You know what I love? You know, sometimes I write and a word comes to me that I've never used before, and I don't necessarily know what it means, and I put it on the page and I carry on writing, and then later I look up what the word means and it's perfect. Like, it's perfect for the thing that I've written. Now there's other times when I can't think of the right word and I'll just put any word in there. And then what I often find is when I go to find the right word, it begins with the same letter or it's got the same kind of sound to it, even though it's not quite the right word. But yeah, I think that's fascinating.
I mean, and there's also a feel when something is finished. From the point of view, it's like, oh, that tap's turned off now. Oh, okay. And I can feel the difference when I think it's got to go on.
Yeah.
As opposed to, actually, that's really done.
Yeah. I've kind of found that with writing for class, because with writing for class, it tends to be writing 2 pages. And so somewhere along the line, I think I've got to a point where my piece is finished. You know, it's very rare I go over the page.
Yeah.
But what was interesting, so one of the, there was a poem that I submitted for a competition called Shit Happens. It's on my Medium thing. Now, when that one was written, when I first wrote it, it finished at the 2 page because it was a piece that I wrote for class. And then when I went to, I thought I'll go and talk to Alexis, who's you've met Alexis now, who's my editor, and she said to me, there's a bit missing. And I think what had happened is I've almost conditioned myself to finish all of my pieces within 2 pages. That I think what happens is I round them off, come to the end, because unconsciously I'm coming to the end of the 2 pages. And I found that actually oftentimes there is something else that needs to go in to round the piece off. So because she said to me, the bit that's missing out of that piece was, who is this person to you? And so then it was like, oh, right, okay. But if you were to read it, I don't think you would look at it and think this was written in, like, the first part was written, I don't know, maybe 18 months ago, maybe longer even. And then the extra bit was written just before I submitted for the poetry competition, whenever that was this year. So there's a big gap between the two, but you wouldn't, I think if you looked at it, you wouldn't read it and think, oh yeah, she's added this bit in.
I mean, it was interesting when she read the poem that I'd sent her, and it was fascinating how in my head it sounds one way, and as she gave it out to me, it was like, oh, that's got a totally different feel to it.
Yeah.
It's somebody else's voice.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. When you hear somebody else reading your work, you have a different, you see it and hear it in a bit of a different way as well. And I think when you hear somebody else reading it out as well, if it's good writing, you hear that it's good writing, and you don't necessarily think it's good writing while you're just reading it in your head.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I tend to, and I notice as I read, and this possibly affects how I write as well, there is a certain, it's like I can hear a metronome in my head. And so I guess a lot of things are written and read to that rhythm. But it doesn't seem to be something that, as far as I'm aware, I've created. It just seems to be a rhythm that arises in me. Do you experience anything like that? Or it's just, do you hear a rhythm when you write?
I can't say that I do. I thought it was fascinating hearing you talk about that. I don't know if there was, when I was doing, I can't remember which poets I was doing. Anyway, one of the poets I was studying while in class with Jules, what I was trying to do was to start off with is match the rhythm of the pieces that they'd written, and then just see whether I could, what would happen if I matched the rhythm that I saw in their piece to come in my writing. But I can't say that it's something that that I experience while I'm writing. Sometimes there is a little bit of a rhythm, when we're repeating quite a lot. It's called read and sung in the method writing, that you repeat words or phrases on a regular basis. So sometimes when you get into the doing something in a read and sung kind of way, there's a definite rhythm to that. And I suppose if you're writing in a lost world way, there's a different rhythm to that. So with some of the different voices, there are different rhythms. But I wouldn't say I have a metronome is like a tick, 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 tick.
Clearly my head's a bit odd then.
But like you will write differently, I guess, because of that. Like we've all got our unique way of writing, haven't we? And so I wouldn't say to somebody else, like if that was how it worked for me, I wouldn't say, oh, so try and find the metronome in your mind to write it, because that's clearly something that is
making you some total.
Yeah. You want to write like a crazy woman, have a metronome in your head. But also I would also say don't get fixed on that idea. Because what would it be like to write without the metronome?
Well, it's interesting when I read a piece back, oftentimes I will really focus on not hearing it in that rhythm. And then I read the piece differently. Just seems to be, I guess, something I've fallen into.
Yeah, and not necessarily, but it just might be your voice, because one of the things I notice about your voice when you're talking is you have like a rhythmical way of talking. Like you have a... Pardon?
Interesting, I hadn't noticed.
Yeah, you kind of do, and you kind of have a you'll say something and there's a like a little break, and then you say something else and a little break, and so that so that metronome might be just a reflection of your natural voice.
See, you are so aware of, and do you think this is just because as a coach, not just as a writer, as a coach, you've become so attuned to listening, to picking up from other people?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a coach for over 30 years, so yes. And to start off with, it was you use tools and techniques, but after for a while you kind of you get tuned into lots of different things, and it's not saying that you, like, I can't say that I've ever said to anybody else in my entire life as a coach about what I've just said to you about the rhythm of your voice. So you do get tuned in, but it also comes from, there's something else in play in coaching, and this is one of the things that we'll definitely be talking about in the Cage Mind program, that there is something else at play that has not been paid attention to much in coaching. And that's what I want to point people towards, that there's something that comes through us in the moment when we're present with the person, in service to the person, focused on the person, and then something comes up that we might say or do that you've never said or done before, but which is, you know, perfect for that person, fits with that person, because there's a connection and it's coming from a different place. So yeah, over the years I've got really tuned into that, but understanding the 3 principles shifted my focus slightly. So it would almost be like, if you're the client in front of me, in my coaching, I'm kind of in the past, like I'm focusing here. I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing at, but pointing at your head. Okay, my focus in my coaching has gone to a deeper place. So understanding the principles and there's the, you know, looking at who we are underneath all of this noise in our head. Like, I'm not paying attention to the noise in the head anymore. I'm inviting people to look for that deeper feeling within themselves, whether they're looking at their writing or whether they're editing or whether they're publishing. Like, it's still pointing people in the direction of who they are underneath all of that. So the spiritual understanding just shifted the focus of my attention in my coaching.
So you're going to do I know you're going to do a course on, or based on, a caged mind.
Yeah.
Is this different to what you're talking about, the one that you've just spoken about, or is this all part of the same thing?
No, so the course that I'm going to do based on a caged mind is helping people to see how, even without a spiritual understanding, this is how life worked for them. And because one of the things that I realized through writing A Caged Mind, and there's probably, I can't remember how many pieces there are in A Caged Mind. There's maybe 50 chapters in A Caged Mind. There's another 50 that probably didn't make it there. But through writing, and this happened even before I was working with Jules, I've been able to reflect and see my life and see how insights worked, and see how an inner wisdom that I had was helping me without knowing that was what was going on. And that's what gives me complete and utter trust and faith in my inner guide, inner wisdom, true self, whatever we want to call it, how it operates right here, right now, and how it's going to help me throughout my life going forward. And seeing how it works gives you a whole different approach to self-development, you know, making, you know, doing whatever we want to do better and all of that kind of thing. So it's going to be a reflection, but it's a reflective process, but it's going to be looking at how our spiritual understanding is already showing up in our lives, even when you don't know it. Because a lot of people think, oh yeah, I got the spiritual understanding and that's what changed everything. All the 3 principles does is give you a language to explain how it's always been working. And the more you see how it's already been working in your life, the more you can trust and have faith in it.
And that's so true, because I think it's what human beings do is we join or this joins dots together and makes up that was connected to that. Whatever it may be, an emotional experience, an enlightenment experience, whatever it may be, we like to join dots because this brain that we have is happier there.
Yeah.
Understanding that that's all we're doing. And that, as you say, life was just flowing through us and we don't need to join dots.
No. Well, the thing is, I think when people talk about joining the dots, this is the way that I thought it in the past, is that it was a linear, like there's lots of dots in a line. So for me, and I use the metaphor in A Caged Mind, it's like one of those join the dots pictures that you get in kids' colouring books, where you've got all of these dots on the page, and until you start filling in the lines, you have no clue what the picture is, and the dots are all over the page. And you don't do a linear, it's not a linear picture. And that for me is really one of the things I've really seen clearly, is like even insights don't happen on a linear basis. They're happening all the time, and they've been happening, and the connections get made, and they having a bit of an understanding of the three principles helps you see those connections in a completely different way.
Yes, that's really true. Really true. I mean, it's fascinating when I look back on my journey, and I can see without having to join dots that one thing did lead to another and another.
Mm-hmm.
But actually really understanding that I didn't choose the next bit.
Yeah.
That it just appeared, but there was always a feeling of knowing, oh, this is the next thing to do. Not knowing why.
Yeah.
But it's having a totally different feeling, as opposed to, oh, this is what I have to do next.
Yeah.
That then inevitably those decisions always came to, why, I won't say that rude word on here. Why did I do that? Totally different feelings, aren't
yeah.
they? But you still love.
Yeah, and the thing that I've really seen as well is that, like, you don't know why you're doing something. So when I was writing the daily yarns, like, I didn't know. I would say I didn't have a knowing when I was writing the daily yarns. There was no knowing, because I'd got so much noise in my head about why I was wasting my time doing all this writing and posting on social media, when our work had fallen off a cliff with the pandemic and I should be trying to find work. So I didn't have any knowing about that, but something still, and I can't put the right word to it, but I still wrote and edited 3 hours a day for those very short posts and put them on social media. And it's only when I look back now, I didn't expect to be starting a little indie press. It's only when I look back now that I can see the breadcrumbs of actually that the seeds for that started a long time ago. But until I know what I know now, I wouldn't have even seen it as a seed.
Yes. Yes. And I think that is, we think the tendency to want to see ahead from whatever we're doing now.
Yeah.
Is so ingrained in life.
Well, you work in any
just
organizations, and the first thing you get is you've got all these goals to work to. I mean, when I first started my business, I set myself a whole load of goals, and then there was a point, this is before I knew anything about the principles, there's a point where I thought, I'm not going to set myself any goals and see what happens. And it scared the shit out of me. So for the first 3 months of that year, I was in this feeling of complete, almost panic, because I've not got any goals to work to. And then I was very blessed to have a coaching session with a really good friend of mine, who's a fabulous coach. And I suddenly realized that regardless of whether I'd had the goals, I was still doing what I needed to do to build my business. Yeah. But instead of saying, like, I used to have to go to so many networking events a week and talk to so many clients a week and earn this amount of money and work this number of days. None of that happened because I had the goals. It happened because I was, doing what we talked about earlier, just doing what seemed to be the right thing to do in the moment. And it took all the pressure off. And I built my business for, I don't really have goals now. I have aspirations and dreams, which are slightly different.
Yeah.
But so I would say we've probably run our business now, because Ash and I work together as well in the same business, for probably getting on for 8 years with no goals whatsoever.
Oh, wow. And that just feels I would imagine so different.
Yeah, really different. And when you see, like before the pandemic, like we had a whole series of years where, you know, just at the beginning of the pandemic, we said like we were, without having any more work in the you know, come along, we were set to have our best year ever, and every year was our best year ever, best year ever, best year ever, with no goals.
And it's interesting because there's a large section of our community, or a certain section of it, that are very linked with kind of manifestation, Abraham Hicks and this sort of thing. So allowing in rather than us creating.
Yes. What's interesting, I love that, because when I first started my business plan was a picture. I drew a picture. And Linda Pettit and I talked about it. I don't even know if we talked about it in our podcast. We both have done vision boards in the past. And what was really interesting to me, fascinating actually, I'd forgotten about one of my vision boards forever. And I remembered it while I was talking to Linda. 2 days later, I found it. Quite, how did that happen?
Pesky universe.
Yeah, but what's interesting is I did these vision boards, and then I don't hold on to them as needed to. And so the day that I decided to go self-employed, I read The Secret that evening, the book The Secret.
Yeah. Second time that's come up this week.
Is it really? That's interesting. It's funny because I'd seen it several times before I read it. And it was one of those things, you know, you get to a point where actually somebody said it again and you think, oh yeah, I do need to read this. So the way that I see that is that it's not that you manifest whatever it is that you imagine. It's that when you see what you have imagined, when the opportunities arise, you see them, because they're always there. Like all the opportunities and everything is there. But there's something about when you've kind of thought about what you want. So, I mean, what's interesting to me, one of the things that I did was I did a drawing after a particularly horrible relationship ended. I did a drawing of what a relationship, the kind of relationship that I would like. And what that did for me is, like, when the relationship came along, I was able to recognize it for what it was. So in those moments when I had a bit of a, oh shit, are we, you know, a bit scary moment, and I was about to jump ship, it was like, no, I was able to use that image to remind myself that, yeah, this was the kind of relationship that I really wanted. So, you know, I love vision boards and drawings to, you know, imagining a future, but it's not, for me, it's like, it just opens our eyes to what we want, and then we see the opportunities around to get what we want.
And that's so interesting, because the one thing I hear time and time again is about seeing what you want, putting it out there, but having no attachment to how it appears in your life.
Or even having it.
Interesting. Yes.
Yeah, because, you know, the vision boards that I did, like I did them and then just put them away. And then it's not, I'm not beholden to, this is what I must achieve. Because, and I think if I'd have done that, so when I first started my career with the bank many years ago, I set out my plan because I was ambitious. I set out my plan of what I wanted to do in 10 years' time, and all the steps before, and I achieved all of that, give or take a few months or whatever, but I achieved all of those steps. And when I look back now, I realize how I limited myself. So I was really clear on what I wanted, and saw what I wanted and went for it, and saw all the opportunities that fit in with that linear path that I'd set. And there was all this other things around. And as it happens, you know, I'm doing completely different things to what I was doing then. Because what happened is I got to a point where I did all of that, and then it was like, oh, now what? And then I was more open.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, I've spent the last year or so, having done Michael Hill Super Coach and all this sort of thing, focusing on coaching and banging up against a brick wall.
Yeah.
And it was only when I actually got to a point where I went, maybe I'm just not meant to share what I understand in that way. Because I'd watched somebody else as a total newbie to this understanding be coached. And at the end of it, he went, oh my God, I've got to go and coach this. And I said, that's what we all think, because we see it so much.
Yeah.
It's so valuable and so life-changing. The automatic thing is, I've got to go and coach this. I've got to go and tell everyone about this in this way, because that's so often when we first come into it, through being coached. And it was only when I put that down that it had to be in the way of coaching. And having, well, if I say I didn't sign myself up to the manuscript class, I sent a message to my husband saying, I quite fancy doing this. He'd signed me up.
Oh, brilliant.
Which he doesn't do, because normally my emails pass him by. But it was only when I put that down that I saw that this manuscript had appeared in the background with no resistance, with no anything.
Yeah.
Because I'd been so focused looking that way.
Yeah.
Coaching and all of that responsibility, that life was just creating something else without me even being aware of it.
Yeah. So that's what happened with me with the publishing press. And what's interesting to me, you know, because you know now about the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, and he talks about following your bliss. You know, and I think to myself, like, I am astounded that I'm doing this, but I love it so much. And that's, you know, and it has come relatively easily. There has been times when, you know, I've got caught up in, I've got to do this and I've got to do that, and I feel that kind of pressure stroke overwhelm bit. And then I remember, oh God, this all started just by me following what made sense in the moment without me making it happen. Why do I suddenly feel like I have to control it all? And then I just drop back and keep on following the nudges. And it's, in a way, it's a little bit difficult to do that, because it does rely on a certain amount of hope, faith and trust that it's all going to work out in the end, because we just don't know. I mean, you know, there is always a part of me that thinks, you know, I hope life isn't going to drop me to my knees at some point to give me a big life lesson. Please no. You know, and that everything's, that, you know, that's always been my kind of blind spots, like everything, the rug's just going to be pulled out from underneath me at some point and I'm going to be destitute. Touch wood, that's not happened so far. Yeah, so that's when we start feeling like we've got to control it. So just trusting where it's going to take you. Because I, like, when the idea came up about starting the publishing press, I did have a whole load of thinking about it, like, why am I doing this? I'm a coach. I've been a coach. You know, it's different for me because I've been a coach for so many years before I came across the principles. So, you know, of course it was going to be what I do. You know, and the principles, I didn't make a decision to start using the principles in my work. I just found my coaching started to be different. And over time, I kind of went, yeah, okay, this is the direction I need to be looking in with people, and, you know, forget the way that I used to work with people. Although, you know, sometimes it's right to work in those traditional ways as well, because it's not the way of working that makes the difference, it's the insight. So I had a lot of thinking about why am I starting a publishing company when I'm a coach? And then I realized that, oh no, it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. And it doesn't matter, you know, you could be a street cleaner, you could be a doctor, you could be a coach, you could be a nurse, whatever. And with the understanding, you're just going to be different, and it's going to have an impact on people. And I had a big insight around being of service to people, because as a coach, you know, kind of have this feeling of I can help people, I can make a difference to people's lives. And, you know, you know, when we had somebody dying in the family, I thought it was down to me to help that person, you know, have this understanding and I can help that person. And life knocked me off my feet and put me in a place where I couldn't, and showed me that that person would get the help when they needed it, not through me. And then when there was a moment for me to provide service, it was not in any way, shape or form the way that I traditionally thought of myself as helping a person. You know, it actually involved wiping their nose.
Yeah.
And it was such a simple, small thing, but a big thing in the moment. And you think, yeah, you know, this is it's not me that makes the difference. I'm the conduit, and I'm meant to be there in that moment. And I really trust that now. If I'm working with somebody, it's because, you know, life has brought us together for this conversation. And so I really trust that. So I know I have an involvement in it, but I also trust that there's something far deeper, far greater, that is the main, has got the hands on the steering wheel, put it that way.
Oh yeah. And it's beautiful when you have that trust, because then we're out of the way and life just gets easier. And it's also fascinating to see when you fall out. I mean, I know from my point of view, my God, can I fall out?
Yeah.
Total utter blancmange.
Yeah.
Very good.
It really helps you when things do start to feel like that. You know, and there's the story in the book of when Ash collapsed on the flight. You know, what was a life and death situation, and you have all this noise going on and all this fear, but separate to that is this calm place that is completely different. And that I can see, looking back through my life, that calm place always existed, but I didn't appreciate it. I wasn't aware of what it was. It was this understanding of the principles that helped me see what that was, and so helped me to see that that's always been there regardless. But because you don't know what it is, you kind of dismiss it.
And yet it's such a beautiful place. Why do we do that?
Because we're human.
Exactly. I mean, it seems
we're designed that way. Like the why question is, for me, it's like I don't even get into why, because there's no answer to it. But if we didn't fall into that place, we'd have no compassion for people who do, for one. And you know, and there's more purpose to all of that than we give credit for. We're so, when we get into that place, we're so concerned about getting ourselves out of it that we're not looking for the true purpose of the emotion and the feeling, because there's always a nugget in there.
I mean, I know for me, so often, you know, in those darkest times, in those really busy-headed times, those have been the moments of the biggest shifts and insights that have really changed something significantly in how I know life works.
Yeah, Yeah. It's almost as if in order to get you to listen to it, the volumes had to be turned up. So there's the purpose of it.
And it's like anything, you know, wouldn't life be boring with no salt and sugar? Be a bit tasteless, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Even though we may say it's bad for us, actually it'd be really tasteless without it. And if we're just life tasting life, then bring us some salt and sugar. Especially if it's got chocolate attached to it.
Oh, me too.
You mentioned salted caramel. Thank you, Ria. This has been absolutely beautiful.
It's been really lovely.
I love spending time with you. Thank you.
It's been really nice.
Do have a lovely Christmas.
Thank you. And you.
And of course, I'm ready for it. I hope you are.
Yes, I've been working a lot just recently to give myself the opportunity to have a good break and set myself up for.
The kitchen's in time.
Yeah, fingers crossed it will be. We'll see.
If not, book somewhere for lunch.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're going somewhere else anyway.
No, we usually do, but we've got 8 coming round for dinner on Christmas Day. So yes.
So yeah, you're under pressure to get that kitchen in. If not, maybe McDonald's.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we were going to say, we did say we hope the Chippy's open. McDonald's will probably be open, if nowhere else.
Don't eat McDonald's. Not that there's anything wrong with McDonald's, but just don't eat it. Happy Christmas, Ray.
And to you, Georgia. It's been so nice. All right.
Bye-bye.